when the conductor receives a fare, he will punch in the presence of the passenger. You bought a blue slip or trip slip for the longest distance, 8 cents. A buff trip slip, shorter distance, 6 cents. Pink, shortest distance, 3 cents. These facts were displayed in large print, line after line, like a frieze around under the ceiling of the car. It struck some newspaperman that they would make poetry if bunched together. So he bunched them together. And then they read, Conductor, when you receive a fare, punch in the presence of the passenger. A blue trip slip for an 8-cent fare, a buff trip slip for a 6-cent fare, a pink trip slip for a 3-cent fare. Punch in the presence of the passenger. Punch, brothers, punch with care. Punch in the presence of the passenger. I came across these jingling rhymes in the newspaper and read them a couple of times. They took instant and entire possession of me. All through breakfast they went waltzing through my brain, and when at last I was finished, I could not tell whether I had eaten anything or not. I went to my desk and took up my pen, but it was no use. My head kept humming. A blue trip slip for an 8-cent fare, a buff trip slip for a 6-cent fare, a pink, etc. Punch in the presence. I suffered all the afternoon, suffered all through an unconscious and unrefreshing dinner, suffered and cried and jingled all through the evening, went to bed and rolled, tossed, and jingled right along, the same as ever. Got up at midnight, frantic, and tried to read, but there was nothing visible upon the whirling page except punch, punch in the presence of the passenger. 2 days later, on Saturday morning, I rose, a tottering wreck, and went forth to fulfill an engagement with the valued friend, the Reverend Mr. So-and-so, to walk to the Talcott Tower 10 miles distant. He stared at me but asked no questions. We started. Mr. So-and-so talked, as is his wont. I said nothing. I heard nothing, busy with my jingles. At the 10-mile post, all of a sudden, Mr. So-and-so laid his hand on my shoulder and shouted, "Oh, wake up, wake up! Wake up, don't sleep all day. Here we are at the tower, man. I have talked myself deaf and dumb and blind and never got a response. Just look at this magnificent autumn landscape. Look at it. Look at it. Feast your eyes on it. You have traveled. You have seen boasted landscapes elsewhere. Come now. Deliver an honest opinion. What do you say to this?" I sighed wearily and murmured, "A buff trip slip for a 6-cent fare, a pink trip slip for a 3-cent fare, punch in the presence of the passenger." Reverend Mr. So-and-so stood there very grave, full of concern, apparently, and looked long at me. Then he said, "Mark, there is something about this that I cannot understand. Those are about the same words you said before. There does not seem to be anything in them, and yet they nearly break my heart when you say them. Punch in the... How is it they go?" I began at the beginning and repeated all the lines. My friend's face lighted with interest. He said, "Why, what a captivating jingle it is! It is almost music. It flows along so nicely. I have nearly caught the rhymes myself. Say them over just once more, and then I'll have them, sure." I said them over. Then Mr. So-and-so said to him, he made one little mistake, which I corrected. The next time and the next he got them right. Now a great burden seemed to tumble from my shoulders. That torturing jingle departed out of my brain, and a grateful sense of rest and peace descended upon me. Then my freed tongue found blessed speech again, and the pent talk of many a weary hour began to gush and flow. It flowed on, joyously, jubilantly, until the fountain was empty and dry. As I wrung my friend's hand at parting, I said, haven't we had a royal good time? But now I remember you haven't said a word for 2 hours. Come out with something. The Reverend Mr. So-and-so turned a lackluster eye upon me, drew a deep sigh, and said, without animation, without apparent consciousness, punch, brothers, punch with care. Punch in the presence of the passenger. A pang shot through me as I said to myself, oh, poor fellow, he has got it now. I did not see Mr. So-and-so for 2 or 3 days after that. Then on Tuesday evening he staggered into my presence and slumped down all in a pile in a chair. He was pale, worn, he was a wreck. He lifted his faded eyes to my face and said, Mark, it is a ruinous investment that I made in those heartless rhymes. They have ridden me like a nightmare, day and night, hour after hour, to this very moment. Since I saw you, I have suffered the torments of the lost. Saturday evening, I had a sudden call by telegraph and took the night train for Boston. The occasion was the death of a valued old friend who had requested that I should preach his funeral sermon. I took my seat in the cars and set myself to framing the discourse. But I never got beyond the opening paragraph, for then the train started and the car wheels began their clack, 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 and right away those odious rhymes fitted themselves to the accompaniment. Clack, 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 a blue trip slip, clack, 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 for an 8-cent fare, clack, 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 a buff trip slip, clack, 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 for a 6-cent fare, and so on, and so on, and so on. Punch! In the presence of the passenger. Sleep, not a single wink. I was almost a lunatic when I got to Boston. Don't ask me about the funeral. I did the best I could, but every solemn individual sentence was meshed and tangled and woven in and out with punch, brothers, punch with care, punch in the presence of the passenger. And the most distressing thing was that my delivery dropped into the undulating rhythm of those pulsing rhymes, and I could actually catch absent-minded people not in time to the swing of it with their stupid heads. And, Mark, before I got through, the entire assemblage were placidly bobbing their heads in solemn unison, mourners, undertaker, and all. Before I had finished, I was in a state bordering on frenzy. And my closing remark. He is gone from us, my friends and brethren. We shall never see him more. Haloed he sits with the happy choir singing punch, brothers, punch with care, punch in the presence of the passenger.